Welcome to the Karen Kenney Show.
Hey, you guys, welcome to the Karen Kenney Show. I'm super duper excited to be here with you today. And I think I'm just gonna dive right into this sucker. Happy New Year. This might be the first episode of 2025, episode 296. I think I'm gonna call this sucker Slow Learning. Slow learning. And it's inspired by something that one of my one-to-one clients said to me. There's somebody that's also in the Nest, my group, a spiritual mentoring program, but I had written something in the group, and then they responded with this, and their quote was like really fantastic, and I'll read that to you in a moment. But it got me to thinking about this idea of slow learning because we are a culture that is obsessed with fast outcomes, quick results, right? Let's like big bang boom, like let's get shit done. Like people just want things right now, immediate gratification, right? And my whole experience as a human being has taught me that, and I have learned that most things take a little bit of time to get into this thick skull of mine. Like, I don't know about you, but hello. My noggin could be a little dense sometimes. And here's the thing. I'm smart, right? I'm smart. I'm not necessarily maybe like astrophysicist smart or whatever, but I'm pretty intelligent, you know? I'm not an idiot. I'm not a total idiot. And I sometimes need some time to kind of like simmer, you know? I need the soup to simmer a little bit. Oh my God. And we are in I don't know, double amen hands if you can feel me. Is there some lessons? Are there some things that it's taken you a little while to like learn and wrap your head around and go, oh, that's what that was about? Hello. Okay. But we're a culture that is obsessed with like getting things done fast and let's go. And I'm paying for results and I want the quick this. So rather than learning to fall in love with learning, rather than like falling in love with learning in the process, because hello, learning is a process, but rather than falling in love with that, we just want things to like happen right now. And look, I don't think these fucking devices, like these phones, the tablets, the internet, the interwebs, the socials, I don't think any of those things have really helped us or our nervous system. I just think that we have started to miss out on so much goodness because we are in search of the fast everything. We want it supersized, we want it cheap, and we want it fast. And that is just not for me where I have learned that I need slow learning environments sometimes. And so many people, so many teachers, so many marketers, so many online, whatever, the people who are like, quote unquote, leading others, the quote unquote influencers and the coaches and the teachers and all the things, right? To me, so many people have just like lost the plot. They have totally lost the point. And at this point, it seems like all they're teaching for is results and outcomes, and they're not really going deep into the importance of process, the process of learning things. And I made myself a few notes so I wouldn't forget because this is important to me. So I wrote down this. I said, rather than teaching like in a style or in a way or stressing the importance of firsthand experience, right? Instead of leading towards that, rather than firsthand experience or the process of acquiring knowledge through implementation, we just want things fast. And we're like, here's a little graphic and here's a little 3 steps of this and blah, 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 blah. But I know to be true this, for my own firsthand experience, my evidence has been that I need firsthand experience and that the process of me acquiring knowledge is through implementation, is through action, is through spending some time with something and figuring shit out, right? Learning, true learning to make something your own, to take something from a source out there, like a book or a podcast or um, a course or mentoring or whatever, right? That stuff takes time to sink in. Learning takes time. And I said, if all you want is a particular outcome or a certain result, then you are going to miss out on all the nuances and all the gifts that come from the actual process of learning, including what comes in the process of learning is the challenges, is the confusion, is the setbacks, is the discovery, is the 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. It's the, oh shit, it's the, I don't get it, right? All the stuff that goes into learning, it takes time. Now, look, there are certain things where we do have light bulb moments, right? There are certain times when we're listening to something and all of a sudden it's like, boom, something clicks and it falls into place. But what's usually clicking and falling into place is the time that you've already spent trying to understand something. And then all of a sudden that missing piece is delivered from maybe an outside source, whether again, it's a book, it's a podcast, it's something you read, it's something you heard, it's a quote, whatever. And you're like, oh, like all of a sudden, as we jokingly say in Massachusetts, light dawns over Marblehead, right? Like the sun comes up and you are illumined to something. It's like, oh, like no, like, oh my God, like hitting yourself in the forehead, like, oh, I just realized it. But so much learning, especially, I think so much learning has changed because the delivery system has changed. When I think back in the day when they had, like, if you think about tradesmen and craft people, right, you had to apprentice. Right? Like you had to go like a modern day like internship, right? So back in the day, you had to go and in order to become a welder, in order to become a blacksmith, in order to become a mason, in order to become a carpenter, in order to become somebody who could gather knowledge and skills that then you could use in a smart way and not build dangerous shit that was going to fall apart. You had to spend some time over years upon years upon years. You see it even in like people who have a sensei or people who have, and I believe that we all have our own greatest guru within us, our own greatest inner teacher within us. And I also think that, sometimes we do need an external teacher. We do need an external source of information, of inspiration that can guide us and support us. However, the greatest teacher and the greatest guru lives within our own hearts. However, having said all that, if we are gonna spend time, right, with an external teacher, it often takes some time. Most people, like, they just want things super duper fast. Like I said, like a lot of times by the time you hire a mentor like myself or a coach or whoever, you've been struggling for a while. You've been suffering for a while. You've been like stuck for a while. You've been trying to figure shit out on your own, right? So a lot of times by the time you're like, I'm desperate now, or I've banged my head against the wall enough times, or I've been frustrated long enough, or I've been, like I said, been suffering or in pain long enough, and then you go looking for external help. That's all great, but even that, it requires often some time, like to first of all build rapport and build trust, and then start to get some information and some knowledge, and then actually starting to apply it so that you can learn it yourself, so that you don't just end up regurgitating information and things, which I'm going to talk about that at the end as well. Okay. So if we insist on being in a rush, I know people who try to like read through books, or, they'll say to me like, oh yeah, I read that book. I read that book. I know, I know, I know. Those two words that is the antithesis of all learning. I know. I'm like, if you just walk around thinking you know everything, if you insist on having I know brain instead of like beginner's mind, right? Then you aren't even teachable. You are not learnable because you walk around thinking you know everything. But these days, so much learning has been reduced to like cliff notes or screenshots or quick takeaways. It's like the 5 tips to this, the 6 steps to that, the 7 hacks to have a better whatever, right? We like everything like distilled down to these little sound bites and these little clips and these little digestible things, which I'm not saying they don't have their place, but you're missing out on the full meal, right? It's the difference between having like a sip or a bite of something and you're like, think you got it all figured out from that one thing. I'm like, no, you can't just eat that thing and then know how to create the rest of the meal, right? Like you got to spend some time with things. And here's the thing. We must be willing. We must be willing, to slow down and be with things, to think about things, to try on things, to be in a process and in a relationship with things so that we can assimilate, so that we can integrate, so that we can spend time with implementing things. This takes time. This is what slow learning is all about, is not being in a rush to try to get to some specific or certain outcome, I mean, it's so that you can actually start to understand the information and implement it and integrate it so that you can start to own it for yourself. And what a lot of people are good at is ingesting information, like reading it or, hearing it or whatever. And then maybe they could do like have AI write them some fucking cliff notes or whatever, some like show notes or some like quick things where they can like regurgitate it or whatever. But that's not actually learning. That's just the ability to try and look smarter than you are. And we often actually don't need more information. I talk to a lot of people, especially fellow entrepreneurs and stuff, and they're like, "Oh my God, I have like a graveyard. I have like a graveyard of courses that I bought but never actually did." Or I listened to them, but I didn't actually take any action. Like I bought them and then they sat on my desktop or they sat in a folder, but I never actually went back and did it or used it. We don't often need more information. We seem to be actually overwhelmed and inundated. Our nervous systems are completely overwhelmed by how much input is coming in. What we actually need is to kind of like have better filtration systems. Maybe stop buying 8,000 things. Try to go deep on maybe like one thing, or find a teacher or a source that you trust. Take time to build rapport or relationship with an actual human being and not just their quote unquote content, right? And then see if you can then start to learn some of those things and apply it, trial and error, right? Try it. Fall down, screw up, like pick yourself up, try it again. You know what I'm saying? But again, this takes time, like slow learning. And the other thing I was saying is like true knowledge, like truly understanding something, like truly having quote unquote learned something that you can then apply to your own life in maybe a helpful way or a healing way. True knowledge requires work. It requires some effort. And a lot of times, I think about certain yoga teachers, like people who have been around for a wicked long time. I mean, I've been around for a really long time, but there are people who have been around, even longer than me. And they said one of the ways that I learned how to be a great yoga teacher or a great teacher is I basically spent time in my teacher's presence. Is that I like literally like spent as much time as I could with them. And I watched them and I listened to them and I noticed what they did. Right. I even know one teacher who had a guru that he cared for. Like he literally was put in his care. Like he was like tasked with caring for him. So he would like deliver his tea and he would deliver his meals and he would listen to his lectures and he was learning like, the system of yoga from him. And this is like back in the day. But he said when he shaved his head, I would shave my head. When he crossed his legs, I would. So he started to embody. And it's not about becoming like the other person, but it is about sometimes learning the attributes of that. And I think this is what is often where a lot of times it gets lost in Christianity, where I'm like, the whole point of like, was an embodiment of love. He was like the living example of love. And you want to try, like, if you're a Christian, if that's your thing, right? Then the point is to follow in those footsteps of that deep level of compassion and love and not exclusivity, not hate, not shame, not exclusion, right? So I think sometimes things get lost in translation, but you got to be willing to spend some time in the presence of love to start to really understand it, because it's not like most of us were brought up in wicked love. Like some people I know, I think it's beautiful. They've been brought up in home environments where they felt really seen and encouraged and heard and loved. And it's not that their parents were perfect, but their parents had good emotional regulation and good emotional intelligence, and they could own their shit and apologize when they blew it. And it's not that they were perfect people, but they understood they were imperfect. And so they apologized and they used their words, right? And they taught their kids, how to have good self-confidence and self-esteem and self-respect and self-integrity and self-love. And not all of us grew up that way. So true knowledge, I think, requires slow learning. It requires us to spend time, not just with like external teachers, but also with ourselves, also with sources of like great information or great knowledge or great wisdom. And whether that's like, I think about like A Course in Miracles. Like I've had like a 30-year relationship with that material, right? With that teaching tool. And I've had a wicked long relationship with yoga. I've had a really long relationship with veganism. Like there are things that I've had really long standing, come from a lineage, like come from a tradition and have spent time with. And those are the things that I most confidently can share with others, because I have my own point of view on those things. I've taken it in and I've spent enough time with them to actually have an opinion or a thought, or, might be able to share a perspective that other people find helpful, you know? And one of the things that I often see these days, as I'm thinking about this slow learning, which drives me kind of crazy, is that whole TLDR. I'll never forget the first time I saw TLDR, and I'm like, I'm not hip enough to know what that is. So I had to look up what I'm like, what is it? What are the kids saying? What does this TLDR typed on a thing mean? And it stood for too long, didn't read. Oh my God, the bullshit. I was just like, what is happening right now? Now I understand. To be fair, to be fair, I understand there might be times where somebody is just doing a post that just goes on and on and on and on and on. It's like, what's the point? Like, get to the point. Like, you didn't need to tell me those 17 things, right? But a lot of times, things are more complicated than a quick little spiritual meme or a little quote card or a little like 1 minute blip from your podcast, right? Some things need more space to be shared and to be felt and to be understood. And I think we're becoming a little bit lazy. I think we're becoming a little bit shallow. Not all of us, not everybody all the time. I'm not saying, and I'm not even finger wagging. I'm just, so much of what this podcast is me just looking around the world with my own, and we all have our own unique perspective. This just happens to be mine. This is why it's the Karen Kenney Show. It's just me just kind of looking around and noticing some things and reporting back what moves me, what's exciting me, what's lighting me up, what I learned, what I don't like, what I like, what, blah, blah, blah. This is a podcast. This is a show that for me is one of the ways that I get to spread more love in the world. And one of the things that I think we're losing at, and I think these things are just as important, part of love is being able to look at things and say, this doesn't seem right. Is it just me? Right? Is it just me? But the whole TLDR thing, it's a lack of patience. It's a lack of sometimes nervous system regulation to be able to sit still long enough to think on a thing or to listen to a thing or hear a thing or pay attention to a thing, We don't just have like a loneliness epidemic. We have a patience epidemic. And again, I don't think the devices have really helped at all. I think that instant gratification, that seeking a quick fix or that dopamine hit, it hasn't really served us. And I think that in 2025, instead of going so wide and so broad, Like to me, I think there's a calling right now to have more vertical living, to go deeper, to have more depth in our relationships and our experiences, and to not just try to get like the like I said, the what are the things that I called it? Fast outcomes and quick results, you know? If we're only as teachers and as people who have podcasts or are coaches and mentors and or share information, you know, if we kowtow to what the algorithm wants, and like I'm just not really a person who really plays by the rules. And trust me, I think sometimes to myself, man, I bet I would have like maybe I would have more financial success or more whatever success if I played by the pace and the rule that most of the world runs by, but I'm just not interested. And it's not that I'm not interested because I'm trying to be different or rebellious. It just goes against the grain of who I am. Like I literally feel my body contract when I see most of the marketing and most of the way that the world is like showing up online. Like it's just not that fucking interesting to me at all. And again, I'm not trying to be special. I'm just trying to be myself. Like here's an alternative way, you guys, is we could actually slow down and we could spend some time with some stuff and we could go deep and we could really, really learn. Because one of the pitfalls of ingesting fast information, and I'll give you an example. Here's an example. Okay, yoga teachers, new yoga teachers. So, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that the way that a lot of yoga studios survive, not all, but many, the way that they survive, especially in this climate, is that they run YTTs, they run yoga teacher trainings. That's where they get a good hit or a good bulk of their money because a bunch of people pay up front like 3,000, 4,000, whatever it is, right? Dollars. So the studio gets a big cash infusion, which they can then parse out over the rest of the year to keep their studio viable. Not saying all, just saying many. I don't need the yoga police coming for me. Okay. But one of the things that I often see as a teacher of teachers, I am a yoga teacher for yoga teachers oftentimes. And when I have done workshops and stuff like that for other yoga teachers, what you realize, and especially with newbie teachers, and this isn't, I'm not being mean. I totally know why this happens. This is what happens a lot of times is in the beginning, because they're basically fire hosed with a lot of information, right? Then they're expected to like go out and teach because they're first of all trying to make not everybody who takes a YTT goes on to teach. Sometimes they just do it for their own self-knowledge. They want to understand more, right? They have no intention of teaching. So just understand that everything that I'm saying has exceptions and nuances, okay? But a lot of times new yoga teachers are fire hosed with a lot of information. And then they want to get back out there and start to make money. First of all, they want to use this skill set. They're excited. A lot of times it's ego, right? They want to be seen as a yoga teacher or an authority in their field or whatever the fuck, whatever people think to be a yoga teacher means. And then they also are trying to recoup the money that they just invested in their training. But a lot of times in the beginning, they're basically just parroting, right? Think about what parrots do. They mimic. They hear what their owner does, and then they just regurgitate it. They repeat it, right? So in the beginning, a lot of times what yoga teachers are doing is they're just memorizing things, they're mimicking things, and then they're parroting, they're regurgitating them back, often in the style and the voice of their teachers. Eventually, over time, if you stick with it long enough and you practice long enough what you learned and you continue with your own practice, things will start to settle in. You'll start to have your own perspective. You'll start to have your own voice. You'll start to have your own wisdom. But in the beginning, they don't know how to do this. And a lot of times what people do, and I'm just using yoga teachers as an example because that's a field that I have a lot of experience in. Right. So I've done this workshop called reading the room, like reading the room with the teacher's eye. And I've done workshops on assists, like hands-on assists and putting your hands on people and knowing what to look for. So when you have a room full of people in front of you as a yoga teacher, and you're trying to keep everybody safe and have a good experience, right? Teaching isn't just barking a bunch of information at people. It's not Simon Says. You have to be able to see how what you're saying is landing. You have to be able to see through what their bodies are doing, how their mind is interpreting what you're saying. There's so much more to the whole process, and it is definitely a slow learning process. because one of the things that I do, there's an exercise that I do. I'll often take a person, I put them in the middle of the room on a mat. I ask them to show, like, call out a pose, warrior two, Virabhadrasana, whatever, right? Come into this pose. And then I just have all the yoga teachers stand around and I say, tell me what you see. Tell me what you see here. Because one of the things that I often hear from yoga students who have gone out into the world and taken classes in other studios and with other people is they've often come back and they've said, they didn't correct me once. And they're like, and I even saw some people like da 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 da. And I said, and they've given me feedback about their experiences. And I've said, because a lot of teachers actually don't know how to teach because they haven't spent enough time first doing their own slow learning. They know how to regurgitate. They know how to memorize. They know how to create a sequence, and then they just bark it out. But they're not actually like able to serve the people in front of them. They don't know how to problem solve yet. They don't know what to do with that person who I put in the middle of the room because they might be able to tell, well, it looks like their knees too far forward, maybe, but sometimes they can't even see what the problem is. And I'll say, tell me what you see. And they freeze. And they all kind of go quiet and they all kind of look at me. And I'm like, this isn't like a test where I'm trying to be mean. I'm trying to help you to learn to see with the teacher's eye. And this is not, when we try to do fast outcomes, fast results, immediate, like whatever. And when you have a culture that is teaching for quick outcomes, you're not actually helping people to be able to help themselves. And I'm the kind of person that when I mentor somebody or coach somebody, I'm not interested. I always say this, I'm not interested in creating codependent relationships. I love working with people for long periods of time. That's why I love when my one-to-one clients will do like 4 months with me, maybe take a break, come back, or do 8 months straight or a year straight or whatever it is, because we get to go deep. And we get to have this time where those skill sets, those tools, those things that I share, they start to become their own. They start to make sense because they have enough time to absorb them. They have enough time to spend time with themselves and with this information to start to like alchemize it. I do think of this work that I do as alchemy. We're putting in some contents and we're getting something else out of it. That's the whole your story to your glory process. It's an alchemization. It is a form. I say it's miracles and magic. There's a lot that's happening there. But if you're not willing to spend some time investing in yourself, investing your energy, some money, your finances, your attention, your willingness to learn, your willingness to unlearn and relearn. I'm going to do a whole podcast about that. We got to let shit percolate. You know what I'm saying? And right now, I feel like we're all like, I feel like I've been in a microwave. I just feel like I'm in a microwave being zapped with all these rays and all this energy and all this noise and all this bullshit. But when you take the meal out of the microwave, it tastes like crap. It doesn't even taste like food. It tastes kind of dead. All the life, all the wisdom, everything's out of it. There's no nutrients. There's no nourishment. Like we need like some crock pot. We need like some crock pot learning. We need some nice, slow, low heat, little bit of a simmer. You lift the lid, there's an aroma, some stuff is cooking, some stuff is brewing, right? Some shit is happening. You know what I'm saying? Oh man, no more microwaving. Maybe I should call this episode Microwave versus the Crock Pot. That's how it kind of feels. We want that depth and flavor that comes from that wisdom, that knowledge that comes from slowing down, taking our time. There is so much wisdom in this. There is so much possibility in this. And so now I'm going to finally tell you the quote that inspired this whole thing. So one of my former one-to-one clients, what she basically said is, we were talking about a particular book. And I was talking about how this book is a great addition to a DSP, a daily spiritual practice. And I was saying how, I send this book to all of my one-to-one clients. And this person said, I was very fortunate. I was a very fortunate recipient of the book. during my invaluable one-to-one work with you. That's so sweet. And they said at one point I am understanding more and more is that I may not receive clarification immediately while doing one-to-one work, but it seems to percolate into fabulous aha moments. I am so grateful. Now, this is something I have heard again and again and again. There are people who have worked with me, like I said, some people for 4 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. And everybody learns a little bit differently. There are people that pick up stuff, certain things like right away. There are other people who they're like 3 months out and they're like, oh my God, I just had this situation happen and I just realized what you've been telling me. Right? I have a friend and a client text me the other day. They posted something. They posted something that Mel Robbins had posted or whatever. If you don't know who Mel Robbins is, she's like a online personality coach, has written a bunch of books, right? And Mel said something and I just wrote underneath it to my friend who shared it. And I just wrote, yep, exactly. And they wrote back and they says, this is exactly what you've been teaching me all these years. And I'm like, yep, exactly. Right. I'm like, I may not be posted about it all the time on media. But there is sometimes clarifications and things that start to happen over time. I've had people who do one-to-one work and they come away and they're kind of a little confused and they're like sometimes, not everybody like thinks like this is the best experience of my life. I've never had bad feedback or anything like that. But what often happens is, like I said, 3 months, 6 months, a year afterwards, sometimes years afterwards, I'll get a note from somebody that says, oh my God, all that work that we did together is starting to just show up in my life in the most amazing ways. So what I'm trying to say is slow learning is a really important thing. And if we insist on microwaving things, if we insist on fast tracking things, if we're only teaching as teachers for certain outcomes and, like the Cliff Note version of this, because we like there are people who study the psychology of human markets, meaning there are people who study how people respond to the algorithm, to time, to content. And people will say to me all the time, nobody wants to read some long ass. And I'm like, you're wrong, because I want to read it. Because I'm a reader and I'm a writer and I love long form things. I will sit down and watch a 2 hour, 3 hour, podcast. I'm a person who likes there to be space and room for things to be digested. Why do you think The Nest has been going on for years? Why do you think people in The Nest keep coming back month after month, year after year? Because they have learned over all this time of being with me that it takes time for things to sink in, to make sense, to become their own, to be applicable. And it's through the process of falling in love with the process and not just the quick outcome. So, if there is something that you want to learn, go all in on it. Invest in it. Spend some time with it. Get to decide if it's really for you or not. Like I just spent time, some of you I think know this. I think I've mentioned this. Like this was my first time in like 25 years. I've worked for myself for 25 years. And I went into a little adventure and I went out into the world and I got like a part-time gig for like 6 months working with somebody else and for somebody else. And they're lovely. And I had a great time and I met amazing people. And I realized like my business, me doing my own thing, that's where it's at. But I'm so glad like that I trust myself and I'm adventurous enough and willing enough to go out and do the thing and find like it's FAFO, right? You know me, I got a FAFO. I got to fuck around and find out. But I love going out and finding out things about myself and finding out what really works for me and spending some time with things and spending enough time that I can make an educated, not an educated guess, but like I can be an informed decision. That's what I'm trying to say. So I hope this has been helpful in some way. And those of you who have been listening to this podcast, we're going to be coming up on 6 years. I can't even believe it. We're going to be coming up on 6 years and like 300 episodes soon. So those of you who have been hanging in with me, maybe you understand better than anybody how it is to continually to hear these things. A podcast, yeah, it's usually done fairly quickly or whatever, but it's kind of like over time you might hear some repetition, some repeated things. I do that on purpose because I know how learning actually works. And it often takes time for things to like sink in. Right. So less microwave more crock pot, more slow cooker, right? More slow learning in 2025. And if you're interested, right, in learning from me, there's a bunch of fun ways, you guys, to spend time together. So if you just go to my website, KarenKenney.com, you'll see like all the different ways to work with me, right? You can work with me one-to-one in the quest. That's just KarenKenney.com/quest. If you want to join my group program, my group experience, spiritual mentoring, that's KarenKenney.com/nest. If you want to start doing some online yoga, I'm teaching online yoga. So now no matter where you are in the country or whatever, you can tune in. Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern, and that's just KarenKenney.com/yoga. Of course, you can always just get on my email list, all those things, all that stuff you can find on my website. And you could also just keep listening to the show. But I do hope that I get to work with some of you at some point, either in the nest or one-to-one in the quest, or maybe I'll see you online in a workshop or a yoga class or whatever. That would be amazing. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for spending some time with me, for spending some slow time with me. If you made it all the way to this episode, I really appreciate it and you. And then wherever you go, may you just take your time a little bit. May you go out into the world and just like ease on down the road, keep it a little slow and low, right? Wherever you go, may you leave yourself and the animals and the environment and the people and the planet better than how you found them. Wherever you go, may you be a blessing. Bye.